I never thought for a second that my wife would ever suggest an open relationship. At first, I honestly didn't even know how to react. But let's slow down and take this one step at a time. Where do I even start? Sophia and I had been married for over 10 years. Things were fine, nothing extraordinary, but also not terrible. Just steady, you know? The usual work, bills, and the occasional movie night if we were feeling spontaneous. But apparently, fine wasn't enough for Sophia. To her, fine was just a code for boring. At least that's how I saw it. That's where things really started to go off the rails. We hadn't had that spark in a long time. Sure, the intimacy had slowed down a bit, but honestly, I didn't think much of it. I didn't even realize there was a problem. I guess I missed the memo she'd sent to herself. She dropped these little hints now and then. Nothing too obvious, just vague comments like, "Don't you think our lives could use a little more excitement?" Or, "Wouldn't it be fun to shake things up a bit?" I just brush it off, assuming she meant something simple like taking a trip or picking up a new hobby together. You know, normal couple stuff. Then one night we were sitting on the couch, half watching some random Netflix show, when she blindsided me with it. Out of nowhere, she said, "Luke, I've been thinking, what if we open up our marriage?" I honestly thought I misheard her. I figured she was joking, or at least testing the waters for some kind of weird hypothetical. An open marriage? Like, sleeping with other people and talking about it like we were deciding where to eat dinner? I'm not exactly uptight, but seriously, Sophia, the woman who'd get jealous if a waitress so much as smiled at me, and now she wanted us to sleep with other people? I was completely stunned. All I could manage was, "What the hell are you talking about?" But she wasn't joking. She was dead serious. She kept talking, like she'd rehearsed this whole speech. She said it was about trying something new, bringing excitement back into our lives. We'd still be committed to each other, but we'd have the freedom to explore. You know, intimately. She actually said intimately like it was something you'd order off a menu at a fancy restaurant, not something that could tear apart a marriage. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. My mind was racing. I kept thinking, has she already met someone? Is there another guy out there who's convinced her this is a good idea? So I started firing off questions. Is this about someone else? Who are you talking to? Are you already seeing someone? Sophia just sat there, cool as a cucumber, dodging every question like a pro. "No, Luke, it's not like that at all," she said, but I wasn't buying it. She kept pushing this idea, telling me it could be good for us, a way to grow together. Grow together? Yeah, sure. Nothing says teamwork like sharing your spouse with strangers. The more I tried to talk it through with her, the more she shut me down. She made me feel like the crazy one for not being open-minded. She twisted my words, called me closed off, said I was afraid of change. Every time she said that, it felt like she was chipping away at everything I thought our marriage stood for. I didn't know who to talk to about it. This isn't exactly the kind of thing you bring up at a family barbecue, right? So I turned to my best friend, Mason. I told him everything, expecting him to have my back. But instead, he hit me with some new age nonsense about how a lot of couples are doing it these days. Maybe I should try to see things from Sophia's perspective. He even called it an adventure. An adventure? This is like jumping out of a plane without a parachute. The worst part? Sophia acted like nothing was even wrong. She talked about this open marriage like we'd already agreed on it, like it was a done deal. She'd say things like, "Once we get the hang of it, you'll see how good it is for us. We'll be closer. Trust me." And then, she'd flash me that infuriating smile like she was handing me some twisted gift. Felt like I was the one losing my mind. She'd become distant, spending hours in front of the mirror picking out clothes she never used to care about. Then, she'd come home late, saying she was working overtime or out grabbing drinks with colleagues. And all the while, she kept pushing this narrative that an open marriage was the solution to our problems. Living with her started to feel like living with a stranger who had hijacked my wife's body. Every word she said felt like a slap in the face. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, just trying to figure out where everything went wrong. Was I really such a terrible husband? Had I missed all the signs? Or was she just bored with me? Part of me wanted to shake her, demand to know how we'd ended up here. But another part of me, the quieter, more tired part, was just done. I was exhausted from trying to figure out what she wanted, from feeling like nothing I did was ever good enough. The worst part? Knowing that no matter how much I argued or begged, Sophia was going to do whatever she wanted, whether I liked it or not. Ever tried to convince yourself that something you know deep down is complete nonsense might actually be true? That's what I did. I spent weeks wandering around in a daze, replaying Sophia's words in my head over and over. I didn't want to go along with this open relationship idea. It felt like I was selling my soul just to keep the peace. But at the same time, I was desperate to hold onto any semblance of normalcy I could find. Maybe I was just stuck in the past. Maybe this was just how marriages were supposed to evolve. Pathetic, right? Eventually, I caved. I don't even know how it happened. Maybe I was just too tired of fighting, or maybe Sophia had worn me down with her endless speeches about how this was exactly what we needed. One night, I finally said, "Fine, if this is what you want, then we'll try it." She was ecstatic, acting like I'd just agreed to a weekend getaway. But that wasn't the end of it. No, Sophia wrapped her arms around me, kissed me, and whispered, "You won't regret this." The irony hit me like a ton of bricks. That was the first time she touched me like that in months. And honestly, it felt hollow, like I was just a piece in some game she was playing, and I was the pawn that had finally moved exactly the way she wanted. I tried to play along, to pretend I was the modern, open-minded guy who could accept all this, but inside, it felt like something was rotting away. Every day I woke up with this pit in my stomach, a mix of fear, anger, and self-loathing. But I kept it to myself. I wanted to be the guy who could accept this new version of our marriage. I kept telling myself maybe this would work, maybe it could save whatever was left of us. But it didn't. It only made things worse. Sophia changed almost overnight. It was like someone flipped a switch and she became someone I didn't even recognize. She started putting way more effort into her appearance, going all out to look stunning. It wasn't just about looking put together anymore. She was radiating full-on seductress vibes. Tight dresses, flawless hair, makeup that screamed, "Look at me." I'd watch her leave the house, and instead of thinking, "Wow, my wife looks amazing," I'd find myself wondering, who is she trying to impress? Then the late nights started piling up. She'd come home later and later, always with some excuse that didn't hold water. Work ran long, or I went out for drinks with the girls. The excuses were so thin, it made me question if she even cared enough to lie convincingly. Sometimes she'd walk in with that fake smile, acting like everything was fine, asking about my day as if we were still the happy couple we used to be. But I could barely even look at her anymore. It didn't take long for the suspicions to creep in. My gut was screaming at me, and I couldn't ignore it. There was no way all of this was innocent. I knew Sophia well enough to recognize the signs. The way her eyes would dart away when I asked about her day, the forced cheerfulness in her voice. It was all a front. I was sure she was seeing someone else, but I needed proof. I needed to see it for myself before I did something stupid, like confronting her and looking like a jealous, insecure idiot. So I did what any desperate guy would do. I followed her one Wednesday night. I told her I was working late, and she barely even acknowledged me as she got ready for another night out with her friends. I parked a few blocks away, sat in my car, and just watched. She walked out of the house looking like she'd stepped off a magazine cover, and my stomach turned. I gave her a little head start before I started following her, keeping my distance, making sure she didn't spot me. She drove across town, and before I knew it, I found myself parked outside a fancy restaurant, the kind we hadn't been to in years. And there he was, some guy standing by the door, tall, with that cocky smile like he thought the world owed him something. I watched as Sophia practically floated into his arms, hugging him just a little too long. The way they looked at each other, it hit me like a punch to the gut. You know that look? That chemistry between two people? That unspoken connection? Yeah, I saw it. She was laughing, twirling her hair, leaning in close as they talked. It was like I wasn't even a part of her life anymore. I stayed in my car, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Part of me wanted to storm in there, flip the table over, drag Sophia out by her arm, and make a scene. But I didn't. Instead, I just sat there, watching them share a meal, sip wine, and act like they were the only two people in the world. When Sophia came home later that night, she had the nerve to walk in with that same fake smile plastered on her face. "Hey, babe," she said, acting like everything was fine, like she hadn't just spent hours wrapped up in some other guy's arms while I sat there losing my mind. I couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't keep pretending I was okay with this. "Where the hell were you?" I spat, my anger bubbling over. She gave me that rehearsed look of surprise, like I just asked the most ridiculous question in the world. "I told you, Luke. I was out with the girls. With some guy." I snapped. "I saw you." Her face dropped for a second, like she hadn't expected to get caught so quickly. But she recovered fast, narrowing her eyes and getting defensive. "Are you following me now?" "Jesus, Luke. What's your problem? We agreed to try this. You can't accuse me of cheating when we have an open marriage." "Open marriage?" She said it like it was some magic phrase that made everything okay, like once I'd reluctantly agreed to it, she could do whatever she wanted without question. I could feel my anger surge, boiling over. "Open doesn't mean sneaking around behind my back." I shot back, my voice sharp. "I never agreed to this." Her expression hardened. Her eyes turned cold. "Maybe you should figure out what you really want, Luke. This back and forth isn't working. You're either in or you're out." Just like that, it became a challenge. A dare to see if I could handle her adventure, if I could accept everything she was doing. But I wasn't ready to make that call, not yet. So instead, I stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind me. Sophia just stood there, a smug look on her face like she was winning some twisted game she thought we were playing. After that blow-up with Sophia, I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't just sit back and let her walk all over me. I couldn't unsee what I'd witnessed, her with some guy while I sat in the parking lot like a damn fool. I was angry, humiliated, and sick of pretending to be the understanding husband. Ever had that moment when you know you've had enough? That breaking point where you can't take it anymore and you stop trying to make sense of the chaos? That's where I was. All I could think about now was how to flip the script, make Sophia feel the same pain she'd been dishing out. And what better way to do that than to take her own messed up idea of an open relationship and turn it back on her? Fine, I thought. You want this kind of life, Sophia? Let's see how you handle it when I get in on the action, too. The idea felt wrong, dirty even. But imagining the look on her face when she realized she wasn't the only one calling the shots gave me a sick kind of satisfaction. So, I dove into the dating scene, hoping to find someone who'd be willing to play along with my little act of revenge. But I quickly realized it wasn't as easy as I thought. After all, I hadn't been out there in years. First, it was awkward as hell. I was that guy in the bar, clearly out of my element, struggling with small talk and not knowing what to do with my hands. And don't even get me started on dating apps. Half of them felt like scams, and the other half just made me feel like a fish out of water. Every profile I swiped through reminded me of how much time had passed since I'd been part of the scene. But I was determined. For weeks, I found myself at bars, hanging around happy hours, chatting online, anything to keep up with what Sophia was doing. It became this twisted race. Who could open up more? Even if I wasn't being fully transparent about it. But honestly, felt like I was walking through quicksand. Most women were either turned off by the idea of a married guy, or they disappeared as soon as they found out about the open marriage. I couldn't blame the women for backing off. The whole situation was one big, messy drama. But then I met Lily. By that point, I was almost ready to quit the whole thing. But I found her on a dating app. Her profile was blunt and to the point. No strings attached, just looking to have a good time. Honestly, I didn't think much of it when I shot her a message. But to my surprise, we hit it off. She had this bold, take-no-prisoners attitude, a sharp sense of humor, and a laugh that felt like a breath of fresh air in the middle of all the chaos I was living through. We started chatting every day, and eventually met up for drinks. Lily was different. She had this confidence, this I don't care what anyone thinks vibe that was impossible to ignore. And when I mentioned Sophia and the whole open relationship disaster, she didn't even flinch. Instead, she leaned in, her eyes sparkling with curiosity, as I unloaded all the details. What had led up to this, how it made me feel. She was hooked, like my messed up marriage was the latest episode of a soap opera she couldn't wait to binge. I wasn't sure if I should be flattered by her interest or embarrassed by how much of a mess my life had become. But then Lily hit me with it. "Let me get this straight," she said, swirling her drink as she processed everything. "Your wife wants an open marriage, but she flips out when you have a problem with her going out with some guy? Pretty much," I muttered, frustration and shame mixing in my voice. Lily chuckled, shaking her head. "Sounds like she wants all the perks and none of the consequences. Classic." And that's when she dropped the bomb, the reckless, wild idea that could flip everything on its head. "Why don't you give her a taste of her own medicine?" she suggested, leaning in with a grin that made my heart skip a beat. "Invite me over. Introduce me as your special friend. Then let's see how she reacts when things get cozy between us." She raised an eyebrow, waiting for my response, and I was floored. The audacity of it all. It was like she had handed me the perfect weapon to get back at Sophia. I was about to turn the chaos Sophia brought into our lives right back on her. But then doubt crept in. Was I really going to go through with this? I was furious, yes, but was I the type of guy who would stoop this low? What would it even accomplish? Lily could see my hesitation, sensing my inner conflict. "Don't overthink it," she said, her voice soft but firm. "She opened this door. She can't get mad when you walk through it. Besides," she added with a playful smirk, "it's about time you got a win in this mess. Let me help you." A win. That's exactly what it felt like. Finally having some control in a situation where I'd felt powerless for so long. After all, Sophia practically dared me to live this open lifestyle. Why not give her what she asked for? Or at least what she thought she was asking for. The more I thought about it, the more it made sense. If this was the game Sophia wanted to play, maybe it was time for me to play it better. So I agreed. Over the next few weeks, Lily and I kept meeting up. Casual drinks, some talking, a kiss here and there. But the more time we spent together, the more the lines between revenge and something deeper started to blur. It felt freeing, like I was finally getting some of my dignity back. And Lily? She was all in, completely up for the ride. She'd tease me, joking about the look on Sophia's face when she'd walk in and find us together. The plan was simple. I'd invite Lily over for a small get-together with a few friends. When the moment was right, I'd put my arm around her, kiss her in front of Sophia, and watch the fireworks. This was going to be the big moment, the dramatic reveal where I'd expose Sophia's hypocrisy for everyone to see. But as the day approached, doubt started to creep in. Is this really me? I kept asking myself. Am I really going to go through with this? Sure, Sophia deserved to be called out, but was I really going to make a public spectacle of everything? Every time I thought about it, I'd swing between feeling like a hero to feeling like a total jerk. Yet, I couldn't ignore the rush. The idea of finally taking control, standing up for myself, and showing Sophia that I wasn't just going to roll over. It was intoxicating. The day of the party came and I was a nervous wreck. Sophia didn't suspect a thing. She left that morning, acting like everything was fine, while I stayed behind to get everything ready. Lily showed up early, looking stunning, ready to play her part. I could see the excitement in Lily's eyes, and it was almost contagious. For the first time in ages, I felt like I was actually in control of my own life. When Sophia finally stepped through the door, I was ready. Ready to watch her perfect little world fall apart. Ready to make her face the consequences of the freedom she'd been craving for so long. And Lily? She was right there beside me, playing her part to perfection. But the second Sophia walked in, I realized something important. No amount of planning or mental preparation could truly get me ready for what was about to happen. The plan was in motion, and as the night dragged on, my nerves were a mess. I'd run the scenario in my mind 1,000 times. Sophia walks in, sees me with Lily, chaos breaks out. But when the moment actually came, it hit me like a freight train. It was like I was standing on the tracks, daring it to hit. The party started off normal enough. Friends trickling in, beers being cracked open, and laughter filling the air. But none of that mattered. The only thing on my mind was what would happen when Sophia walked through that door. And Lily? She was a pro. She was flirty, magnetic, and had this effortless charm. We exchanged subtle glances, playful touches, and knowing smiles that seemed innocent to everyone else. But to me, it was so much more. This wasn't just a party. It was a high-stakes game. The prize? My pride. And I was all in. Then it happened. The sound of keys jingling at the door, and time seemed to stretch. Sophia stepped in, looking exactly as she always did after work. Confident, maybe a little tired, but completely unaware. For a second, she wore that mask of surprise, like she'd forgotten I was having people over. But as soon as her eyes landed on Lily, I knew everything had changed. She didn't freak out right away, which caught me off guard. Sophia's smart, calculating. She doesn't just go off half-cocked. She sizes up situations first. Instead of storming in and causing a scene, she gave me a tight-lipped smile and began making her rounds, saying hello to everyone like nothing was wrong. I couldn't help but admire her composure, but I knew it was all an act. I could see the way her eyes flicked over to Lily, cold and sharp, trying to figure out who she was and why she was so comfortable with me. It felt like watching a pressure cooker slowly building up, ready to explode. All I could do was poke it a little more. When Sophia finally made her way over to us, she gave us that fake, sugary smile and asked, "So, are you going to introduce me to your friend?" The air in the room was thick with tension. You could feel it hanging there, just waiting to break. Sophia stared at Lily, sizing her up, trying to make sense of this stranger in her house. "Oh, this is Lily," I said, trying to sound casual, like it was no big deal. "She's, well, my date for the night." I dropped the bomb like I knew exactly how Sophia would react. And sure enough, I was right. For a moment, her face went pale, like she couldn't even process what she just heard. But she recovered too quickly, too smoothly, forcing a laugh and trying to play it off. "Really? Your date?" she asked, her voice shaky but trying to keep it together. "So this is what an open marriage looks like to you?" Lily didn't skip a beat. She leaned in closer to me, her hand casually resting on my arm as she gave Sophia a cheeky, knowing smile. "Well, Luke did say you were the one who suggested it," she said, batting her eyelashes like she and I were sharing some private joke. "I think it's a great idea, actually." That was all it took. Sophia's face twisted into something dark, and her composure completely shattered. "What the hell is this, Luke?" she snapped, her voice rising. "You think it's funny to bring some expletive into our home? You think humiliating me like this is a joke?" I knew this was coming. I knew she was going to explode, but hearing the anger in her voice, seeing her fury, made my heart race. Yet somehow I stayed calm, calmer than I ever thought I could. "I'm just playing by the rules now," I said, my voice steady. "You're the one who wanted an open marriage, remember? Well, here I am, trying to make it work." The rage in her eyes was pure, raw, and for a second, I almost saw the woman I'd once known. But then the words came out in a rush, like she was choking on her own anger. She opened her mouth, but couldn't spit out the words fast enough. And that's when Lily took it to the next level. She turned toward me, wrapped her arms around my neck, and kissed me deeply, no hesitation. It wasn't some casual peck. It was a kiss that left no room for misunderstanding. Sophia's reaction was instant. She let out a half-scream, half-sob, her face contorting with disbelief and fury as she shoved the coffee table aside with such force that the drinks went flying. "You piece of expletive," she screamed, her voice breaking. "I knew you were pathetic, but I didn't think you'd stoop this low." A twisted sense of satisfaction coiled in my chest, like I'd finally flipped the script. I had forced her to see how messed up this whole situation had become. But as I watched her storm out, slamming the door so hard the walls rattled, that satisfaction evaporated. It didn't feel like a victory. It just felt hollow. All the anger, the pain, it had led to this ugly final moment. And once Sophia was gone, there was nothing left. The party fizzled out. Our friends, clearly uncomfortable, made their excuses and left, leaving only Lily and me in the living room. She looked at me with that knowing smile, like she could read every thought in my head. "That was intense," she said softly, brushing a hand through her hair. "You okay?" I let out a shaky breath, unsure how to answer. Was I okay? No, not really. I was a mess of emotions. Relief, regret, anger, confusion, and sadness. That's what lingered in the air between us. But there was something else I knew for certain. I wasn't sorry for what I'd done. Sophia had pushed me to the edge, and for the first time I'd pushed back. "Yeah," I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. "I think I needed to do that." Lily walked over and wrapped her arms around me, pulling me close. It felt good to be held, to feel someone's warmth after everything that had just gone down. She looked up at me with those bright, playful eyes and said, "Well, if it helps, you did great." Then she kissed me again. This time, it was slower, with a tenderness that seemed to cut through the chaos swirling around us. We ended up on the couch, tangled in each other. For the first time in what felt like forever, I allowed myself to relax, to feel something other than anger and pain. When Lily whispered, "Why don't we go upstairs?" I didn't hesitate. I needed this. Needed to lose myself in someone else, if only for a night, to escape from the nightmare my marriage had become. The night that followed was reckless. The kind of freedom that comes when all your pent-up rage and frustration finally release into something. Anything that makes you feel alive again. It was wild, intense, and passionate. For those few hours, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Freedom. It was dangerous, fleeting, but in that moment, it felt like I was finally breaking free. But the morning after hit me like a ton of bricks. Reality crashed down on me, sharp and brutal. The clarity that followed was the kind that only comes when the anger fades, leaving you alone with the mess you've made. Sophia was gone. Not just out for a walk or at work, but completely gone. No texts, no calls, just silence. And I knew why. The night before had crossed a line I didn't even realize was there. The thrill of revenge had given way to a sinking feeling deep in my gut. I'd nailed the final coffin in the ground of our marriage. The next few days passed in a blur. I replayed every moment in my head. The kiss, the screaming, the slam of the door. I couldn't shake the image of Sophia's face, the fury and hurt in her eyes when she realized what had happened. And as much as I hated to admit it, guilt started creeping in. I felt guilty for putting on a show, guilty for dragging Lily into it, guilty for being the man I never wanted to become. But at the same time, there was this part of me that knew this was the inevitable end of something that had already died. It wasn't just that one night that had killed our marriage. It had been dying for months, maybe years. When Sophia finally returned, it wasn't with an apology. No, she stormed in like a hurricane, angry, sharp, and ready to lash out. Her expression was cold, every word dripping with contempt. "So this is who you are now?" she spat, her voice full of venom as she took in the scene. "Some pathetic expletive who needs to put on a show to feel like a man?" I tried to stay calm, but the anger flared up again, faster than I could control it. "Don't you dare turn this around on me, Sophia." I shot back, my voice rising. "I did what you asked. This is what you wanted, right? An open relationship? Or was that just an excuse for you to screw around behind my back?" She fired back, practically shaking with rage. "You didn't have to do that. Bringing her here, rubbing it in my face. Do you have any idea how humiliating that was?" "Humiliating?" I snapped, finally losing my temper. "How do you think I felt for months, Sophia? Knowing my wife was out with some other guy, pretending it was all for the sake of our marriage? Bear me. You got exactly what you asked for, and now you can't handle it." We went back and forth, each word a jab, each one feeding the fire. It felt like we were speaking two different languages, completely incapable of understanding one another. She accused me of being insecure, of ruining what could have been a fresh start for us. I threw her lies right back at her, calling her out for turning our marriage into a farce. All the anger, all the resentment we'd been bottling up for months came pouring out. By the end, we were both panting, standing there like two boxers after a brutal fight, neither of us willing to back down. And then, a long, terrible silence. A realization hit. There was nothing left to say. Maybe we should just end it, I said, the words tasting bitter as they left my mouth. Maybe we're better off without each other. Sophia didn't flinch. She just nodded, jaw tight. Fine, let's get a divorce. And just like that, years of marriage, a decade of memories, all reduced to a single, impulsive decision. She walked out again, this time for good. I wanted to chase after her, fix everything, take back every word I'd said. But I didn't. I just stood there, feeling like the floor had disappeared beneath me. What followed was a blur. Endless meetings with lawyers, asset division, paperwork. We split everything. The house, the savings, everything we'd built over the years. If you think it was clinical and straightforward, you'd be wrong. Every meeting felt like tearing a wound open that would never fully heal. There were days when I'd leave the lawyer's office and drive aimlessly, not knowing where to go, my mind spinning with what-ifs and regret. Our friends? They picked sides. Some sided with me, saying I was right to stand up for myself, that Sophia had pushed me too far. Others sided with her, calling me an expletive, for dragging Lily into it, for airing our dirty laundry. It felt like our whole social circle had divided. Everyone had an opinion. Everyone was judging us from the sidelines. As for Sophia, she was off living her life. Last I heard, she moved in with the guy from the restaurant. Guess it wasn't just a fling after all. She stopped reaching out. No more texts, no more attempts to reconcile. It was like she'd finally found what she was looking for, and I was just the leftover baggage she had to discard. Part of me felt relief. At least she wasn't pretending anymore. But the other part, the part that still remembered the good times, the part that still cared for her, felt like it was being crushed. Starting over wasn't easy. I moved out of the house. It felt tainted, the memories too heavy to carry. I found a small apartment across town, far enough to not run into Sophia, but still close enough to keep her lingering in my thoughts. I threw myself into work, trying to fill the empty spaces with distractions. But no matter how hard I tried, the past followed me everywhere. The apartment felt empty, like a ghost town. The weekends stretched on forever, and every quiet moment reminded me of the life I used to have. Sometimes, I'd scroll through old photos, vacations, family holidays, times when we didn't know how fragile our happiness was. I'd look at them, wondering how it all fell apart so quickly. How we went from two people madly in love to two strangers who couldn't bear to share the same space. And then, I'd shove those thoughts away, focusing on anything else to keep myself from spiraling into regret. I did see Lily a few times, but it wasn't the same. The initial spark, the excitement of something new, quickly faded. She was a great distraction, but she wasn't Sophia, and we both knew it. Eventually, we drifted apart. I didn't stop it. It just felt like it was for the best. I needed time to heal, to figure out who I was without the weight of a broken marriage around my neck. I couldn't drag anyone else into my mess, so I let Lily go. And here I am now, trying to rebuild, trying to figure out what comes next. Some days, it feels like a weight has been lifted, like I can finally breathe again. Other days, it feels like I'm stumbling through thick fog, unsure of where I'm headed or if I'll ever truly feel okay. But there's one thing I know for sure. This isn't the end. The story doesn't stop here. And maybe, just maybe, something better is waiting for me on the other side of all this. Leaving town after the divorce was like ripping off a Band-Aid. Painful but necessary. I moved to a new city, started fresh with a new job, and tried to focus on my life, for the first time in years. The job itself wasn't anything spectacular, but it gave me structure, a rhythm to hold on to. And with all this newfound free time, I wasn't sure what to do with myself. So I threw myself into anything that would distract me from the past. Hiking, running, hitting the gym. It felt like I was rediscovering who I was without the weight of a broken marriage around my neck. Lily and I met a few times after that, but it didn't take long to realize that whatever connection we'd shared was built on shaky ground. She was amazing, don't get me wrong, but I wasn't ready for anything real. Too much baggage. Too much healing still to do. So we parted ways quietly. No hard feelings, Just an unspoken understanding that we were both still picking up the pieces of our lives. Nights were the hardest. I'd lie awake, thinking about Sophia. Not the woman I fought with, but the woman I fell in love with. The woman who made me laugh, who I once couldn't imagine a future without. But I had to remind myself. This was over. She was gone. That was a choice we both made. Eventually, those thoughts stopped hurting as much. They faded, becoming a dull ache instead of a raw wound. And somewhere along the way, I came to understand something important. Revenge, well, it was a hollow victory. It might have felt satisfying for a moment, but after it was all over, it only made the wound deeper. It didn't bring peace. It didn't bring closure. All it did was keep the anger alive, looping around until there was nothing left but bitterness. When I finally let go of that, when I stopped holding out for closure or apologies that would never come, I felt lighter, like a burden had been lifted. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. Free from the lies, from the constant drama, from the tension that weighed on me day in and day out. I won't lie and say everything's perfect now. Some days, I still feel the sting of regret. There's still that pull to look back, to wonder if things could have turned out differently. But I'm moving forward, one step at a time, figuring out what happiness looks like for me on my own terms. I'm not chasing anyone or anything. I'm just living my life, learning to be at peace with who I am. And for the first time in a long time, that's more than enough.